Caught my husband's secret family. My revenge made national news asterisk. Hey y'all, I'm Samantha, and I'm about to tell you the most insane story that literally made national news. 3 months ago, I discovered that my husband of 12 years didn't just have a mistress. He had an entire secret family, a whole wife, 2 kids, and a house in another state that he'd been maintaining for 8 years while I thought we were trying to have babies. But here's where it gets absolutely wild. My revenge didn't just destroy his double life. It exposed a massive insurance fraud scheme that brought down his entire company and landed him in federal prison. Asterisk, by the time I was finished. My cheating husband lost his freedom, his secret wife lost her home and kids, his company went bankrupt, and I became a whistleblower millionaire with a Netflix deal. This story has everything. FBI raids, secret families, corporate fraud, and the kind of revenge that literally changed federal law. Asterisk, so buckle up, because this is how one woman's discovery of her husband's secret family brought down a multi-million-dollar corporation and made her rich in the process. Asterisk, all right, y'all, let me set the scene because this story starts in the most normal way possible. I'm 35 years old, living in Dallas, Texas. In this gorgeous 6-bedroom house in Preston Hollow that cost us $850,000. My husband Michael was a senior claims investigator for Premier Insurance Solutions, one of the biggest insurance companies in Texas, making about $180,000 a year plus bonuses. Asterisk, I worked as a pediatric nurse at Children's Medical Center, which was my dream job because I absolutely loved kids. Michael and I had been trying to have a baby for about 4 years. Going through fertility treatments, IVF, the whole emotional and expensive journey that so many couples know too well. Michael was this charismatic, successful guy who seemed like the perfect husband. He was tall, handsome, drove a brand new F-150 Raptor, was always talking about providing for our future family. He was also incredibly involved in our community, coaching Little League, volunteering at church, and organizing neighborhood events. We'd been together for 14 years total, married for 12, and from the outside we looked like the American dream couple. Beautiful house, successful careers, active in our community, and constantly posting on social media about our amazing life together. Michael traveled frequently for work, investigating major insurance claims across Texas, Oklahoma, and Arkansas. He'd typically be gone 3 or 4 days a week, sometimes longer, for complicated cases. I trusted him completely and was actually proud of how dedicated he was to his career. Asterisk, the hardest part of our marriage was definitely our struggle with infertility. We'd been trying to conceive for 4 years and had spent over $60,000 on fertility treatments, IVF cycles, and specialists. Michael was incredibly supportive during this journey, or so I thought. He'd come with me to every doctor's appointment when he was in town, hold my hand during procedures, and comfort me after each failed cycle. We're going to have our family. Samantha, he'd tell me after each disappointment, it's going to happen for us. And it'll be even more special because we worked so hard for it. I remember feeling so grateful to have a husband who was patient and understanding about our fertility issues. Some of my friends had partners who got frustrated or impatient, but Michael seemed genuinely committed to the process. We'd even started looking into adoption as a backup plan. Michael had filled out all the paperwork, gone to the home studies, and seemed excited about the possibility of adopting if we couldn't conceive naturally. Asterisk, Michael's job as a senior claims investigator was demanding but well paid. He specialized in major commercial claims, things like warehouse fires, construction accidents, and natural disaster damage. His territory covered 3 states, and he was constantly traveling to investigate fraud cases and assess damages for multi-million-dollar claims. Premier Insurance trusted him with their biggest and most sensitive cases. Unlike a detective, Michael would explain to people at parties, I figure out whether claims are legitimate or if people are trying to scam the insurance company. It's challenging work, but it's important to keep premiums fair for honest customers. Michael was really good at his job and had received several promotions and bonuses over the years. His supervisor, Janet Walsh, always praised his thoroughness and his ability to spot fraud that other investigators missed. The travel was the hardest part of Michael's job for our marriage. He'd typically leave Monday morning and return Thursday evening, sometimes staying through Friday if a case was particularly complex. Fight. But Michael was great about staying in touch while he was traveling. He'd call me every evening to talk about his day, text me photos from his investigations, and always brought me little gifts from whatever city he was working in. Asterisk at home. Michael was everything you'd want in a husband. He was handy around the house, constantly working on improvement projects. He'd installed a beautiful deck in our backyard, renovated our master bathroom, and was always finding new ways to make our home more comfortable. Michael was also incredibly social and charming. Our friends loved him. Our neighbors thought he was great, and he was always the life of the party at any gathering. He coached Little League Baseball for our local rec center, even though we didn't have kids yet. "I want to be ready when we have our own son," he'd say. Plus, these kids need positive male role models. Michael was also very financially responsible. He handled most of our money management, investments, and insurance policies. "I understand this stuff better because of my job," he'd explain. "Let me take care of the boring financial stuff so you can focus on your nursing career." Looking back, can see how Michael used his job knowledge and travel schedule to create the perfect cover for his double life. At the time, I just thought I was married to an incredibly dedicated and successful man. Asterisk over the past 2 years, there were tiny things that didn't quite add up, but I rationalized them away because I trusted Michael completely. Sometimes Michael would mention details about his cases or travels that didn't match what he'd told me before. When I'd ask for clarification, he'd say I'd misunderstood or that he'd been talking about a different case. His expenses seemed higher than they should be for business travel. Even though the company reimbursed his travel costs, Michael's personal credit card bills showed a lot of charges in cities where he was supposedly working. "Sometimes I have to pay for things up front and wait for reimbursement," he'd explain. When I asked about the charges, plus, I like to stay at nicer hotels and eat at better restaurants than what the company policy covers. I pay the difference myself. Michael had also become more secretive about his phone and computer. He'd always been casual about leaving his devices around. But recently, he'd started taking his phone everywhere and closing his laptop whenever I walked into the room. When I mentioned these changes, Michael said his company had implemented new security protocols about confidential client information, so he was being more careful about data protection. Asterisk, the beginning of the end came 3 months ago during what should have been a routine evening at home.
Okay.
Michael was supposed to be in Tulsa investigating a major warehouse fire. He'd been gone since Monday and wasn't supposed to return until Friday evening. Wednesday night around 9 p.m. I was scrolling through Facebook when I saw a post from my friend Jessica, who lived in Oklahoma City. She'd posted photos from her daughter's soccer game with the caption, "Great game tonight. So proud of my little athlete." In the background of one of the photos, I could clearly see Michael sitting in the bleachers watching the game. He was wearing the same blue polo shirt he'd been wearing when he left for his business trip to Tulsa. My first thought was that there must be a logical explanation. Maybe Michael's case had brought him to Oklahoma City, and he decided to stop by Jessica's daughter's game since he was in town. But when I called Michael that night, he told me he was still in Tulsa and had spent the entire day at the warehouse fire site. He made no mention of being in Oklahoma City or attending a soccer game. I didn't mention seeing the photo, but I started paying much closer attention to inconsistencies in Michael's stories. Asterisk, y'all. Seeing Michael in that Facebook photo when he'd told me he was somewhere else completely was like a punch to the gut. But instead of confronting him immediately and giving him a chance to come up with more lies, I decided to get really smart about figuring out what was actually going on. I spent the next week doing some serious detective work while pretending everything was totally normal at home. First, I went through every social media platform I could think of, looking for any other photos or posts that might show Michael when he was supposed to be working. I found 3 more instances over the past 6 months where Michael appeared in other people's posts from cities he'd never mentioned visiting for work. In one photo, he was at a barbecue restaurant in Oklahoma City wearing casual clothes on a Tuesday afternoon when he'd told, me he was investigating hail damage in Amarillo. In another, he was clearly visible in the background of a photo taken at a high school football game in Lawton, Oklahoma, on a Friday night when he'd claimed to be working late on a case in Arkansas. Most concerning was a photo from a birthday party where Michael was holding a little boy who looked to be about 6 years old. The child had Michael's exact same dark hair and brown eyes, and they were both smiling in a way that looked incredibly natural and familiar. The photo was posted by a woman named Claire Peterson, who lived in Oklahoma City. Her Facebook profile said she was married to her best friend and showed dozens of photos of her with the same little boy, plus a younger girl who looked to be about 4. Asterisk, I spent hours going through Claire Peterson's social media profiles, and what I found made my blood run cold. Claire had been posting photos that included Michael for over 3 years. Not constantly, but regularly enough that he was clearly a significant part of her life. There were photos of Michael at birthday parties, Christmas morning, Easter egg hunts, school events, and family barbecues. In every single photo, he looked comfortable, natural, and completely at home. The 2 children, the boy who looked so much like Michael and the younger girl called him Daddy in several video posts Claire had shared. Claire's relationship status said married, but she never posted photos with wedding rings or mentioned an anniversary date. Her last name was Peterson, not Miller like it would be if she was married to Michael. But the most shocking discovery was a photo Claire had posted exactly 2 weeks ago with the caption, "Date night with my amazing husband. 8 years together, and he still makes me feel like the luckiest woman alive." 8 years. Michael had been with Claire for 8 years, which meant their relationship had started just 4 years into our marriage. Asterisk next, I decided to look more carefully at our finances to see if I could find evidence of Michael supporting another family. Michael had always handled most of our money management, claiming his job gave him better insight into investments and insurance products. I'd trusted him completely and rarely questioned his financial decisions. But when I started digging deeper, I found some extremely concerning patterns. There were regular transfers from our joint checking account to a separate account. I'd never heard of amounts ranging from $2,000 to $4,000 every month for the past 3 years. When I called the bank to inquire about these transfers, I learned that the account belonged to something called MP Family Holdings, LC, and that Michael was the only authorized signatory. I also discovered that Michael had taken out a $150,000 home equity line of credit on our house 6 months ago without telling me. As his wife, my signature wasn't required. But the fact that he'd borrowed against our home without mentioning it was a huge red flag. Most shocking was finding out that Michael had been claiming me as a dependent on his taxes, while also filing separate returns that claimed Claire and her 2 children as dependents. This wasn't just adultery. This was systematic financial fraud that could have serious legal consequences. Asterisk, I realized I needed professional help to understand the full scope of what Michael was doing. So I hired a private investigator named Marcus Rodriguez, who specialized in infidelity and financial fraud cases. Marcus was this former FBI agent who'd seen every kind of deception imaginable. When I explained the situation and showed him the social media evidence, he immediately recognized it as more than just a simple affair. "This looks like a classic bigamy case," Marcus told me. "Your husband isn't just cheating, he's living a complete double life with what appears to be a second family." Marcus's investigation over the next 3 weeks was incredibly thorough and absolutely devastating. He confirmed that Michael had been maintaining a relationship with Claire Peterson and her 2 children for over 8 years. The children believed Michael was their biological father, and Claire believed she was in a committed, exclusive relationship with him. But here's where it gets really crazy. Marcus discovered that Michael had been telling me, Claire, that he was divorced from me and that we were just co-owners of some property that made it complicated for him to move to Oklahoma full-time. Asterisk, but Marcus's investigation revealed something even more shocking than Michael's bigamy. He'd been using his position at Premier Insurance to commit massive fraud. Michael had been manipulating claims investigations to benefit Claire's business interests. Claire owned a small construction company that specialized in storm damage repairs. And Michael had been steering contracts to her company by inflating damage assessments. Over the past 3 years, Michael had approved nearly $2 million in questionable claims that resulted in contracts for Claire's company. He'd been essentially using his position to funnel insurance money to his secret family. Marcus also discovered that Michael had been creating fake claims for properties that Claire's company allegedly owned, then approving settlements that went directly to accounts controlled by MP Family Holdings. The fraud was sophisticated and systematic. Michael had been using his knowledge of insurance procedures and his authority as a senior investigator to steal from his own company while funding his double life. Asterisk, Marcus's investigation also revealed the extent to which Claire had been deceived by Michael. Claire genuinely believed that Michael was her committed partner and the father of her children. She had no idea he was married to me or that he was using his job to commit fraud to support their relationship. Claire's construction company had been incredibly successful over the past 3 years, largely due to the contracts Michael had been steering to her. She believed her success was due to her own hard work and business skills. Most heartbreaking was learning that Claire had been struggling as a single mother before meeting Michael. Her children's biological father had abandoned them when they were babies, and Michael had stepped in as a father figure. Claire had built her entire life around Michael and was planning to marry him as soon as his divorce from his ex-wife was finalized. Something Michael had been promising for years, but obviously never intended to do. Asterisk, after reviewing all of Marcus's evidence, I realized I had an opportunity to not only expose Michael's bigamy, but also his massive insurance fraud scheme. This wasn't just about destroying my cheating husband's life. This was about exposing criminal activity that had cost Premier Insurance millions of dollars and could potentially affect thousands of innocent policyholders. I spent the next week planning a coordinated exposure that would reveal Michael's crimes to law enforcement, his employer, and both families simultaneously. My plan had 5 phases. Phase 1, report the insurance fraud to Premier Insurance and state regulators. Phase 2, provide evidence to federal QET. Provide evidence to federal inqueteral authorities for potential criminal prosecution. Phase 3, expose Michael's bigamy to Claire in a way that would protect her and her children. Phase 4, ensure that both families received full disclosure about Michael's deception. Phase 5, protect myself legally and financially from the fallout. Asterisk. All right, y'all, this is where my plan to destroy Michael's entire double life gets absolutely wild. I wasn't just going after a cheating husband. I was taking down a criminal who'd been stealing millions of dollars while deceiving 2 entire families. Asterisk, first, I compiled all the evidence of Michael's insurance fraud into a comprehensive report. For Premier Insurance's corporate fraud department, the evidence was overwhelming. Falsified claims reports, manipulated damage assessments, unauthorized contract approvals, and a clear pattern of steering business to Claire's company for personal gain. I included bank records showing the financial flows between Premier Insurance settlements and accounts controlled by Michael, documentation of his relationship with Claire, and proof that he'd been living in Oklahoma part-time while claiming Texas residence. I submitted the report on a Monday morning through Premier's anonymous fraud hotline, but I also sent copies directly to the CEO, the board of directors, and the state insurance commissioner. Premier's response was immediate and severe. By Tuesday afternoon, Michael had been suspended pending investigation, and by Wednesday, company investigators were going through every claim he'd handled for the past 5 years. Asterisk, while Premier was conducting their internal investigation, I took the evidence to federal authorities. Insurance fraud across state lines is a federal crime. and the amounts involved in Michael's scheme qualified as major felony charges. I met with FBI agent Sarah Chen, who specialized in white-collar crime and insurance fraud. When I showed her the evidence Marcus had gathered, she immediately recognized it as a significant case. "This isn't just marriage fraud or adultery," Agent Chen told me. "Your husband has been operating a criminal enterprise that's stolen millions of dollars from a publicly traded company. This could result in decades in federal prison." Asterisk. The FBI opened a formal investigation within 48 hours and began coordinating with the IRS. Since Michael's tax fraud was also a federal crime, the most delicate part of my plan was figuring out how to expose Michael's deception to Claire in a way that wouldn't completely destroy her life or traumatize her children. Claire was an innocent victim of Michael's lies, just like I was. She'd built her entire life around a relationship that was based on fraud and deception. I decided to approach Claire directly with the evidence, giving her the opportunity to process the information privately before it became public through the criminal investigation. I drove to Oklahoma City on a Thursday afternoon when I knew Michael was supposedly in Arkansas for work. I'd found Claire's address through public records and decided to show up at her construction company office. When I walked into Peterson Construction, Claire was there reviewing blueprints with one of her employees to look exactly like her photos, pretty professional and completely unaware that her world was about to explode. "Are you Claire Peterson?" I asked. "Yes. Can I help you?" "My name is Samantha Miller, and I need to talk to you about Michael Miller. I think you know him as your boyfriend, but he's actually my husband of 12 years. Claire's reaction was immediate and devastating. She went completely white, sat down heavily in her chair, and just stared at me for what felt like forever. "That's impossible," she finally said. "Michael is divorced. He's been working on finalizing some property issues with his ex-wife. But they haven't been together for years. Claire, I have our marriage certificate, photos of us together from last month, and bank records showing he's been living in our house in Dallas. Michael has been lying to both of us." I spent the next 2 hours showing Claire all the evidence I'd gathered: her marriage to Michael, our joint finances, the timeline of our relationship, and most importantly, the insurance fraud that had been funding their life together. Claire was devastated, but also incredibly intelligent. As she processed the information, she started connecting dots about Michael's behavior that had never made sense before. He never wanted to take photos together in public, she realized. He said he was private about his personal life, but now I understand he was afraid of being seen. His schedule was always so unpredictable. He'd change plans at the last minute or disappear for days without much explanation. He never wanted me to meet his coworkers or friends from Dallas. He said he liked keeping his work life separate from his personal life. The most shocking part of our conversation was when Claire realized that her business success had been based on Michael's fraud. "All those big contracts I've been getting," she said slowly, "it's the ones that came through premier insurance adjusters. Michael always said he'd put in a good word for my company. But I thought it was just networking, Claire." Marcus's investigation shows that Michael approved nearly $2 million in questionable claims that resulted in contracts for your company. Your business success was built on his criminal activity. Claire was horrified. She'd worked incredibly hard to build her construction company and was proud of her success as a single mother and business owner. "This means everything I've accomplished is based on a lie," she said, starting to cry. "My children's stability, our home, their school, it's all built on stolen money." I felt terrible for Claire because she truly was an innocent victim of Michael's schemes. She'd been used just as much as I had been. After Claire processed the initial shock, we decided to coordinate our response to Michael's deception. We both wanted Michael to face full consequences for his crimes, but we also wanted to protect our respective families from unnecessary trauma. Claire was particularly concerned about her children, who believed Michael was their father and had no idea about his double life. We agreed that Claire would confront Michael privately first, giving him a chance to confess voluntarily before the criminal investigation became public. If Michael confessed and cooperated with authorities, we would try to minimize the impact on the children. If he continued lying and denying, we would pursue maximum consequences. Claire called Michael that evening and asked him to come to her house for an important conversation about their relationship. I waited in my car outside Claire's house while she confronted Michael with the evidence of his bigamy and fraud. According to Claire, Michael's initial reaction was to deny everything and claim that I was a crazy ex-wife who was trying to sabotage his happiness. But when Claire showed him the bank records, the insurance documents, and the photos of Michael and me together from recent months, he finally broke down. Michael admitted to maintaining both relationships but claimed he'd been trying to figure out how to handle the situation. That he'd never meant for things to get so complicated. When Claire asked about the insurance fraud, Michael initially denied it, but eventually admitted that he'd maybe been a little too helpful in steering contracts to her company. Claire recorded the entire conversation on her phone, capturing Michael's admissions of both the bigamy and the fraud. After confessing to Claire, Michael came home to Dallas and tried to convince me that his relationship with Claire was just a mistake that had gotten out of hand. "Samantha, I know this looks terrible, but I can explain everything," he said. "Claire was just a friend who needed help after her divorce, and I got too involved in trying to help her business succeed." "Michael," I replied calmly, "I know about the A-tier relationship, the children who call you daddy, and the $2 million in fraudulent claims. This isn't a mistake. This is a criminal enterprise." Michael tried several different approaches: denial, minimization, blame shifting, and finally, desperation. "If you report this, you'll destroy innocent people," he said. "Claire's children think I'm their father. Claire's business will collapse. We'll be ruining lives beyond just mine. You should have thought about that before you decided to commit fraud and live a double life for 8 years, I responded. Asterisk, y'all. Watching Michael's entire life implode was more satisfying than I ever could have imagined. But it was also absolutely wild to see how far-reaching the consequences were. Asterisk, within a week of my FBI report, Michael's case had become a major federal investigation involving multiple agencies. The FBI discovered that Michael's fraud was even more extensive than Marcus had originally found. Over 8 years, Michael had approved over $5 million in fraudulent claims, with at least $3 million going directly to accounts he controlled. Michael hadn't just been stealing to support his double life. He'd been building a massive financial empire through systematic insurance fraud. The investigation also revealed that Michael wasn't the only premier insurance employee involved in this scheme. He'd been working with 3 other adjusters and 2 contractors to create a whole network of fraudulent claims. Federal agents raided Michael's offices, our house in Dallas, Claire's house in Oklahoma City, and the offices of Peterson Construction, seizing computers, financial records, and evidence. The raids made local news in both Dallas and Oklahoma City, with reporters calling it one of the largest insurance fraud schemes in Texas history. The scandal completely destroyed Premier Insurance as a company. Federal investigators discovered that Premier's internal controls were so weak that Michael's fraud had gone undetected for years, even though the patterns should have been obvious to anyone paying attention. The company's stock price collapsed when news of the fraud became public. Customers started canceling policies, regulators launched investigations, and the company faced hundreds of millions of dollars in liability. Premier's CEO, board of directors, and several executives were forced to resign. The Texas Department of Insurance took over the company's operations, and it eventually filed for bankruptcy. Thousands of Premier employees lost their jobs, and hundreds of thousands of policyholders had to find new insurance coverage. The scandal became a case study in corporate fraud and led to new federal regulations for insurance company oversight. Michael was arrested at our house on a Tuesday morning while I was at work. FBI agents executed a search warrant and found additional evidence of his fraud hidden in his home office. He was charged with wire fraud, mail fraud, money laundering, tax evasion, and conspiracy to commit insurance fraud. The charges carried a potential sentence of up to 40 years in federal prison. Michael's bail was set at $500,000, which he couldn't afford after federal agents froze all accounts connected to his criminal activity. He spent 6 months in federal detention before finally accepting a plea deal that required him to cooperate fully with the investigation of other conspirators. Michael's plea deal resulted in a 12-year federal prison sentence, full restitution of stolen funds, and forfeiture of all assets acquired through his criminal activity. Claire's life was completely destroyed by the revelation of Michael's crimes, even though she was an innocent victim. Peterson Construction was shut down immediately when federal agents determined that most of its revenue had come from fraudulent insurance contracts. Claire lost her business, her home, and her children's financial stability. Most heartbreaking was watching Claire explain to her children that Michael wasn't really their father and that he'd been lying to their family for years. The children, who were 8 and 6 years old, were devastated and confused about why their daddy had disappeared and why they had to move out of their house. Claire had to declare bankruptcy and move back in with her parents in a small town outside Oklahoma City. She also faced potential civil liability from Premier Insurance's bankruptcy proceedings, since her company had received fraudulent payments. Michael's case became a national news story when reporters discovered the bizarre details of his double life and massive fraud scheme. The story had everything that makes for compelling news: bigamy, corporate fraud, innocent victims, and millions of stolen dollars. National news networks picked up the story, with headlines like "Insurance Investigators Double Life Brings," "Down Company and Bigamists," "Fraud Scheme Costs Thousands Their Jobs." I was contacted by reporters from CNN, Fox News, and several major newspapers who wanted to interview me about discovering Michael's crimes. Initially, I declined most interview requests because I wanted to protect my privacy and let the legal process play out. But when I realized that the story was going to be told whether I participated or not, I decided to work with reputable journalists to ensure the facts were reported accurately, because I'd been the one to expose Michael's fraud scheme. I was eligible for significant whistleblower rewards from multiple sources. The SEC awarded me $1.2 million for exposing the securities fraud related to Premier Insurance's false financial statements. The IRS paid me $800,000 for reporting Michael's tax evasion and the broader fraud scheme. Premier Insurance's bankruptcy trustee awarded me an additional $400,000 for providing evidence that helped recover stolen assets. In total, I received over $2.4 million in whistleblower payments. Plus, I was able to keep our house and other assets that weren't connected to Michael's crimes. The money was life-changing, but more importantly, I felt vindicated knowing that Michael's crimes had been exposed and that he was facing real consequences. About 6 months after Michael's sentencing, I was contacted by a literary agent who wanted to help me write a book about my experience. The story of discovering Michael's double life and exposing his fraud had all the elements of a best-selling true crime memoir. I spent 8 months working with a ghostwriter to tell my story in a way that was honest about the emotional trauma while also explaining the complex financial crimes. The book, titled Double Life, Double Cross: How I Exposed My Husband's Billion-Dollar Fraud, became a New York Times bestseller and led to a bidding war for the film rights. Netflix ultimately bought the rights for $1.8 million and is developing a limited series based on my story. I'm serving as an executive producer on the project to ensure that the story is told accurately and that Claire's experience as a victim is portrayed sympathetically. One of the most unexpected outcomes of this whole experience has been my friendship with Claire. After the initial shock and trauma, Claire and I realized that we'd both been victims of Michael's manipulation and that, we could support each other through the recovery process. Claire eventually found a job with a construction company and Oklahoma City, and has been slowly rebuilding her life and her children's stability. Her kids are in therapy to deal with the trauma of losing the man they thought was their father. Okay. But they're resilient and doing better than expected. Claire and I text regularly and have become genuine friends despite the bizarre circumstances. That brought us together. She's planning to attend the Netflix premiere when the series comes out. And we've talked about potentially writing a joint book about recovery from financial and emotional fraud. Michael is currently serving his 12-year sentence at a federal prison in Texas. He's eligible for parole. In 2031, if he maintains good behavior, he's written me several letters trying to apologize and explain his actions, but I haven't responded to any of them. According to news reports, Michael has been working in the prison library and supposedly teaching financial literacy classes to other inmates, which seems ironic given his crimes. It's also reportedly writing his own book about his experience. Though I can't imagine who would want to read a fraud's justification for destroying multiple families. Today, almost 2 years after discovering Michael's double life, I'm living an amazing life that I never could have imagined. I'm still working as a pediatric nurse because I love my job. But the financial security from the whistleblower rewards and book deal has given me incredible freedom. I've been able to travel, take time off when I want, and focus on healing from the trauma of Michael's betrayal without worrying about money. I'm also in a wonderful relationship with David, an FBI agent who worked on Michael's case. He understands the complexity of what I went through and values honesty and integrity above everything else. Most importantly, I've learned that sometimes the worst betrayals can lead to the most empowering outcomes if you're willing to fight for justice, instead of just accepting victimhood. Michael thought he was clever enough to maintain a double life and steal millions of dollars without consequences. Instead, he destroyed a major corporation, ruined multiple families, and gave me the material for a best-selling book and Netflix series. Sometimes the best revenge isn't planned. Simply refusing to be a victim and making sure that criminals face the full consequences of their choices. That's how you handle a husband with a secret family. Y'all, you don't just get mad. You get FBI agents, federal prosecutors, and a Netflix deal.